All right, hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and welcome to Extraordinary Women Challenging the Ordinary. My name is Claire Hardy, and I am the co-founder and managing director of Move the World. For some of you, this may be your first time hearing about Move the World, so while I have your attention, I thought I would tell you a little bit about us. We are a small female-led charity focused on educating as many youth in Ghana as possible to be active global citizens. Move the World legally came into existence in 2016, but its work really began 4 years before that in 2012. It was a different name at that point and a completely different focus, focused in on dancers, but it was Move the World in the making. In 2013, co-founder Megan Taylor and I we met and we decided that together we could make something happen. The connection to Ghana started with first a Google search, then a phone call with the renowned and now late Bernard Woma, followed by an initial trip in 2015. And on that trip, we met Phyllis, who was 11 at the time. And she told me that she was going to be the president of Ghana one day. And to this day, I still do believe her. And it wasn't one of those young children's dreams of, I'm going to rule the world. And it also wasn't her determination in her eyes, although that was definitely prevalent. But it was the fact that she saw herself worthy as a woman to take on the vision of being her first Ghana female president. And that really stuck with me. I felt at that moment that the women that she had around her, they must be doing something right for her to want to believe. And more recently, I met Amoah. And I want you to imagine the face of this young 10-year-old girl. She lives in a growing community just outside of Accra, and she enjoys school and excels in all of her classes. She gets to school early to help sweep, and she stays late to help with whatever she can. However, it's estimated that by the time she's 12, she will be almost 4 years behind her global peers in terms of her confidence, her academic attainment, and skill set for the world of today. That's 4 years behind if she has the right support system to stay in school. An estimated 4 years before Amoah wasn't able to attend school for an entire academic year due to COVID-19. So as I was thinking about tonight and reflecting on Phyllis and Amoah's stories, I was thinking about these 4 inspiring and awe-invoking women sitting in front of you. They were all given a chance and an opportunity to develop, grow, and learn through various methods and journeys. None of the women sitting in front of you had a free ride, but they made it work. And that's the mission of Move the World. We want to enable students to believe in their decisions and thoughts, in their ability to make a difference no matter their age, and that there's no right or wrong answer, but numerous ways to solve a problem. One of my favorite quotes is by Winnie Bambaya, the executive director of United Nations Program of HIV and AIDS. She says, by empowering a woman, we empower a child. By empowering a girl child, we make it possible for her to grow up and become an empowered woman. The impact of educating a girl has been proven time and time again, and in recent studies show that an educated woman will invest around 90% of her income back into the home and her community, thus reducing poverty and improving health, safety, and education for everyone around her. International Women's Day campaign this year is #ChoosetoChallenge. And you're going to hear from all of our speakers and panelists tonight on what they're choosing to challenge. But my pledge this year is to ensure as many people as I can reach directly and indirectly have access to education. And I don't mean just the sit-down education that we get at school, but the ability to learn something new every day. And when I look back on Move the World and what we've been able to accomplish, it has 100% been a learn something new every day type of career. So tonight, we are here to listen to, as I mentioned, some incredible women doing incredible things in the world. But we're also here to raise awareness and funds for our Get Global program. So again, many of you may not even know what that is, so I'll tell you. In short, it's a global citizen education program designed and delivered by local trained changemakers. Hashtag our facilitators. It's not your everyday classroom sit-down program. It's an engaging experiential education experience that allows students and facilitators to learn alongside each other. In each session, students participate in various activities such as bracelet making, planting beans, mindfulness, and storytelling to explore themes such as poverty, hunger, good health and well-being, and gender equality. Our learning themes are the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. But our platform is an engaging, reflective, and safe learning environment that opens up conversation and learning. And I can tell you that there is a lot of great discussions and heavy, heavy debates that happen in some of these sessions, especially around gender equality. So to complement the program, each student receives a Get Global passport, which acts as a learning journal to use throughout the entire of the program. We piloted these programs in 2019. And since then, Get Global has worked with 404 students aged 10 to 12 years old in schools and community settings, focused on the first 6 Sustainable Development Goals. We've employed 10 local trained facilitators to run these programs in full. And our only full-time member of staff, our Move the World Ghana director, Laurencia, works hard with her team of self-proclaimed go-getters and all of the EPIC facilitators. Together, there's really nothing stopping them. In October and November of this past year, we piloted our newest venture, Get Global 2.0. And I'm very excited to announce tonight that this launch of the follow-on program for students aged 13 to 15 and focus on SDGs 7 to 12 will kick off this summer. So if you've been following the math, we've got Get Global that's been working since 2019 and hits SDGs 1 to 6. We're going to launch Get Global 2.0, which is 7 to 12 SDG. So how many SDGs are there? There's 17 in total. So if you want to do the math, you can see that yes, eventually we will get to Get Global 3.0. Just give us a bit of time. I personally believe that each child has the right to a quality education. And if that can be, they can be an active global citizen and make a mark in this world. Tonight's event is in support of Get Global and raising up the next generation of global citizens in Ghana. And your support will help us do that. With a donation big or small, Phyllis and Amoah will be one step closer to leapfrogging their global peers rather than getting left behind. So each 7-month program costs £1,500. And although that might be a steep donation to make, £100 trains a facilitator and provides lasting job opportunities. £65 allows a student to take part in the program in its entirety. And £5 will provide one Get Global passport. My incredible colleagues are posting these links in the chat, should you be in a position to give. But you haven't come here to listen to me speak tonight, but to hear from some incredible female powerhouses that are around the world. And we want to have more of these conversations this year. We want to continue shouting from the rooftops just how important education is. So please sign up to our mailing list so we can tell you about all of the exciting things coming up. And to get you started, we are launching our auction tonight in support of Get Global. Now this auction works a little bit different. Each month we will be adding a new item while others are being auctioned off. So you got to check in regularly. Feeling a little bit like Vanna White at this point, but again, my incredible colleagues are currently posting those links in the chat, and we will continue to do so tonight. But again, you didn't come here to speak to me or hear from me. You came here to listen to 4 incredible women, Kellie, Rebecca, Juliet, and Evelina. And so without further ado, I want to honor and thank these women for sitting in front of you and me, for their drive, for their determination, and for their zest for life. They were once little girls just like Phyllis and Emma with a dream, and they've made that dream a reality. So I want to thank our host, who is Move the World's longtime trustee, treasurer, friend, and advisor, Kellie, for hosting this evening and opening up the conversation to you. So over to you, and thank you so much once again.
Oh, thank you so much, Claire. It is, without a doubt, you talk about the 4 of us being powerhouses, but every time I hear you or Megan speak, it brings me to tears, and I am inspired constantly by you guys. So thank you so much for letting us know about Move the World, our programs, and the basis for this evening. So a little bit about myself, as Claire says, I'm a long-time trustee of Move the World, and I am recently become the treasurer as well. So I have a vested interest in what's happening with our fundraising and all of our events. A little bit of background about me. I have a long career behind me, starting in finance, moving to IT software, and finally into a field many people haven't heard of called customer success. I've worked for large corporates such as IBM and HSBC, as well as medium-sized companies, startups, and even NGOs, including a long-term volunteer stint as director of a charity called Challenging Heights in Ghana, which is the point where I met Claire, but that's an entirely different story. I'm currently a coach, consultant, mentor, and author in the relatively new field of customer success, including writing and publishing a book called The Customer Success Pioneer. Finally, I truly believe that by encouraging every company to embrace the principles of customer success, we can drive better business for global and social good. I'm truly blessed and honoured to be facilitating the discussion this evening, and would now like to invite our guests to briefly introduce themselves before we get on to the questions and themes of the evening. So I'm going to go in order that you are on my screen. So Rebecca, would you mind introducing yourself first?
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Farmer and I work in children's education with a focus on literacy projects and initiatives that give children a voice from underrepresented communities. I'm currently the charity director for an organisation called Christianna, Christianna Foundation, and we work in Nigeria on library and literacy projects. I'm also the founder of Telling Our Tales, and this is a project which is a global initiative to give children a voice through allowing them to co-author children's books with professional authors and illustrators, and we provide a platform for them to share their stories with the world. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Having known Rebecca a while myself, I love everything that she's been doing, but I'm particularly enthralled by your Telling Our Tales initiative. I can't wait to see where that goes into the future. So Juliet, you are next on my screen if you would like to introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. My name's Juliet Amoah, and I'm currently the executive director at a civil society organization here in Ghana that uses technology to try to get citizens to participate a little bit more in the governance process. And so we do lots of work around anti-corruption and anti-graft issues. We do lots of work around just social accountability and just getting people interested in social protection issues and how those things affect them and their livelihoods. I'm a trained journalist. That's where I started. So I'm really still very passionate about media development and telling compelling stories. And so I work a lot with people in the media houses and editors around the country to see how data-driven stories can actually open up new horizons for young people particularly. And more recently, I've been involved in the drive for media information literacy and getting away from fake news and misinformation and the whole weaponization of information in Ghana.
Wow. Thank you. That's a very impressive background there. Thank you so much. Evelina, by no means least, but certainly last, could you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. My name is Evelina Green. I am the co-founder and the co-CIO of a credit fund called Broadstone Credit Partners. It is a fund that my partner and I actually launched earlier this year. So it is my first time being an entrepreneur as well as being an investor in today's world. I'm originally Bulgarian. Going back to something that Claire said, I think a very important part, of my journey, both professional and personal journey, really has to do with education and the fact that I had the opportunity to receive education actually in the States. And that is really what started me on my career journey, and to a certain extent, personal journey. That's how I met my husband. So it's interesting because it really, when Claire was speaking, I was really thinking about that and, about education. And just when I think about education, I always think that that's the great equalizer. And that has definitely been the case for me throughout my life, throughout my career, again, both personal and professional. And it's something that resonates very strongly with me. As I mentioned, again, I've spent the majority of my career, actually all of my career, in finance. I've worked for, again, organizations, some pretty big banks, and then some smaller organizations. And for the first time, I'm embracing a journey which is going to be building something from scratch that I'm very, very excited about.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And I have to say, I love your background. It's just so beautiful. I'm assuming that's somewhere from Bulgaria, but it
so that's actually Piazza Navona.
Oh, is it? Oh, wow, that's fantastic. It actually is very reminiscent for me of Prague, but it's a beautiful background. So thank you everyone for coming and for agreeing to be part of our event this evening. As Claire said, tonight is one of the events that we are doing across Move the World this year in celebration and in support of the International Women's Day 2021 theme this year of Choose to Challenge. So as we go through this evening, for any of you that are attending this event, please do feel free to share your thoughts in the chat channel. You can chat amongst yourselves, share your thoughts and your ideas about what you might be listening to. But also there'll be a chance after the discussion to pose questions to our guests. So if you've got any questions you'd like to ask, either put them in the Q&A section or in the chat. Again, as Claire says, we've got colleagues monitoring those channels, so we will pull out any questions for the guests and pose them later. So the International Women's Day was launched just under a month ago. It's a month tomorrow. International Women's Day was the 8th of March. And I think very few people actually realise that it's not just one day. It's a launch day of a theme for the entire year. So at Move the World, we have pledged that this year we're going to highlight that theme at every opportunity that we get. So we'll use our social media platforms, we will use our events, we will keep bringing it back to this theme for the year, which is Choose to Challenge. So our discussion tonight is going to be mostly about challenging ourselves, challenging stereotypes, and some of the challenges we face, particularly as women, and particularly women in leadership, because as Claire says, we have these three amazing powerhouses with us. So our first theme tonight is challenging stereotypes. And stereotypes, I think we all experience them, whether it's for most people, regardless of location, culture or gender. But for us here, bearing in mind we're here on the theme of International Women's Day, what do you guys think are the most challenging and harmful gender stereotypes you've had to deal with in your career and your personal life, perhaps? Evelina, maybe if we come to you first, what do you think you have, what are the most challenging and harmful gender stereotypes that you've experienced?
It's interesting because I think that the world has changed so much over the last couple of years that I think that the discourse has really moved on from some of the really negative stereotypes, meaning that people no longer tell you, at least to your face, things that are incredibly negative. And to be honest with you, I kind of miss those days, because when people told you something that was very negative, you could talk back to them. And that conversation was going to be a very direct conversation, and you could address it right there and then. We have moved away from that, which is obviously great. However, I think that we are now finding ourselves in even trickier territory. What do I mean by that? The stereotypes that I find women are facing these days are usually disguised as something positive. They're supposed to be positive stereotypes. They're supposed to be empowering stereotypes. But if you actually listen to them carefully, you can actually still appreciate that they can be incredibly harmful, even though they're dressed to sound positive and to sound uplifting. Again, I'm sure it is very different depending on, your area, your industry, how you interact, whom you interact with, etc. I can give you some of the examples that have definitely affected me. For example, in finance, and I hear very frequently about women in finance that quite frankly upset me. Very frequently in finance, you hear words like, yeah, we should have more women involved in finance, because women are, they're more nurturing, they're more thoughtful in terms of how they take risk, they're better communicators. And the funny thing about that is, if you actually you think about finance and the things that are held in high esteem in finance, those three words don't really come to mind when you're describing somebody that is a money maker, somebody that is actually creating a lot of opportunity, and it is creating a lot of. It's funny because when you actually hear nurturing, when you hear communication, what they really mean is communication. That means you're very good at communicating somebody else's ideas. You're not the idea generator, you're a great communicator, but of somebody else's idea. You're a thoughtful risk taker. What does that mean? You don't really make a lot of money, but you think about downside. So we need to have you as a part of the conversation. Same thing with nurturing. That means, you're not aggressive enough and you don't say. So it's funny because when I think about stereotypes, it's much easier when people are just very negative about what they say. I just find that people have, we have become more and more thoughtful about combating xenophobia, racism, etc. I find that both sides have gotten smarter, i.e. people know how to dress up those old criticism in new clothes. And I think that that has made the conversation a little bit difficult in terms of, being able to combat them. And I think that at the end of the day, the main thing about combating stereotypes and, addressing it is, quite frankly, being very, very direct. I find that with stereotypes, I think that calling people out, quite frankly, especially if you feel that they're not coming from the right place, is very important. Because you know what? Some people are doing it unintentionally. They're just repeating something that everybody is saying, and they really mean no harm. They just need to be educated. Other people mean it, and they deserve whatever is coming to them. In terms of, directly actually addressing the issue and being hands-on about it. But at the end of the day, again, we need to be able to have an open and honest conversation, and people should be willing to participate, and people shouldn't be afraid of saying the wrong thing, in my opinion, because that really lies at the heart of healthy discourse. But we need to be talking about it, because otherwise, you're not an individual. You're just the words on a tin. You just fit in a box. And I'm very, very sensitive personally about stuff like that, because maybe because I come from a country which used to be communist, and I hate fitting in any kind of box. I think that we're all human beings, and we are all incredibly unique, and we are individuals first and foremost. But once again, unless we can talk about those boxes and how we feel about those boxes, we're just not making a lot of progress.
That's a really interesting point to start with, Evelina. You know, the fact that we've moved from people saying what they think because they have every right to, but now people using subterfuge to kind of hide how they really feel about it. So actually, yes, there is more I think there is more discussion going on, but how much of it is honest discussion? I think there is a large proportion of it that's honest discussion, but actually how much of it is somebody hiding under the cover of, I mean, potentially what you're talking about there is toxic positivity, you know, people using what they, you know, framing things in a way that they think is a positive term, but actually it's just, you know, manipulated and gaslighted, even maybe the terms that people are using, so we can no longer tell who truly believes what. And I liked the point there where you say, you know, you never know also whether people are just repeating things that they've heard or whether they truly feel it and understand it. So thanks ever so much for that viewpoint there. Rebecca, I'm going to come to you next. What are your thoughts on, you know, the challenging and harmful stereotypes that you've encountered through your career and your life?
When I first looked at this question, I find it difficult to come up with just one or 2 points, because quite often it's the smaller, consistent, persistent things that build up over time and they kind of get under your skin. But in terms of my personal experience, one of my biggest challenges has been learning to choose my battles. Often when women are looking to change the status quo or shift the culture, they are seen as difficult. And often men who are trying to change the status quo are seen as game changers or mavericks.
Absolutely.
I can't really remember the last time I heard someone describe a woman as a maverick. So I found myself in that situation quite often. And as an employee, it takes quite a lot of energy and not a small amount of risk to try and challenge corporate culture, because you're normally challenging a culture that has been defined and maintained by people senior to you. And trying to manage up at the best of times is quite a perilous activity to engage in. But when you kind of are interweaving into the corporate hierarchy, issues of hierarchy of gender, of class, of race, then it becomes even more difficult. So after many battles, a few wins, but a lot of losses, I had to step back and I had to ask myself, you know, is this the right use, or the most effective use of your energies? And is there another way to tackle these problems? And that's kind of when I realized that the skill set that's most inherent in me is my creative skill sets, as opposed to my negotiation skill sets. So as opposed to being in an environment where I was trying to negotiate change of an existing culture, maybe I would enjoy what I was doing and achieve more by creating something new, creating a new culture from the ground up, and creating teams where we're all on the same page and we're all believing in the same kind of core values, I guess you would call them. So that's what kind of took me into the more entrepreneurial space that I'm in now. So in terms of how did you rise above, I took myself, I stepped back and I made a decision about whether I would be more effective in another space. And then I took the time to identify the space that I wanted to move to, and found the courage to make the move in my early 40s. So, so that for me, women being often looked at as difficult in the workspace, where, in my view, asking questions, being willing to explore culture can only make you better. Asking questions doesn't make you difficult, it just makes you curious. So yeah, that's where it landed for me on that one.
I think that's so many great points there, Rebecca. I mean, I love that asking questions doesn't make you difficult, it just makes you curious. That's a really fascinating way to look at it. But also, you know, choosing your battles. I think that's true for many people. And I think, as you know, combine that with what you were talking about, assessing your own skill set and what you can change and what you want to change, what you want to engage with. I think that's a really interesting approach to what you're talking about there. Juliet, it's over to you. You know, what sort of stereotypes have you encountered, and how have you handled them?
Right. It's just very interesting to hear Evelina, who's sitting somewhere in the Americas, and Rebecca in the UK. I'm here in Ghana. And Evelina was saying that, you know, we've kind of moved away from the more blatant type of stereotypes that, you know, we knew a couple of decades ago. But just listening to both of them and the kind of things that I myself have faced in my career, I think that yes, we've moved the needle somewhat, but we're still there, because those words were she was using about nurturing and being boxed in, and what Rebecca was talking about, you know, when males do it, they're considered mavericks and that sort of thing. It's still something it really resonates with me. You see, in my culture, when women are supposed to be nurturing, you should read that as a queer thing, you know, yes, women. And so for me, each time I would take a bold professional decision, I'd immediately be called in my local language Oba Dinding, and that's like a hard woman or a man woman, basically an iron lady, like Margaret Thatcher's nickname. And because I've been kind of socialized to want to belong and not be disruptive, I think that I spent a lot of my early years in management, second guessing my every decision. I would see lots of male counterparts. They would be, as Rebecca says, called mavericks. They would get more rewarding positions because they took the exact same decisions that I was taking and getting, or would have taken, and yet, you know, they were allowed to do whatever they were doing because it was considered bold leadership. And so, how did I overcome that kind of being taken out of a box, or, you know, becoming more bold in my decisions at work? I think that what I did was I knew that I wouldn't ever fit into this mold of female leadership that my culture had kind of constructed. And so what I did was to try to change the narrative and to change the perceptions. And so what I did was I started to implement a very deliberate strategy that ensured that people that I line managed at least understood what professionalism was about, and that, you know, professionalism is gender blind, really, that, you know, you can take good time-use decisions and sometimes even unpopular decisions, and that these decisions were really important for the overall growth of the organization. And so it was a calculated move. And so at every opportunity, I would reiterate it. Sometimes I got my female colleagues in the team to take decisions, and I would alternate that with a male person to take a decision for project delivery. And each time we would follow through the plans that were laid down either by the female or male, we would then come back to measure the results. And so with time, I think that my teammates were more focused on skills and leadership outputs, and less biased in their opinions of what, you know, roles or how female leaders ought to be and that sort of thing. So I think that it's actually something to do with taking a strategic approach to disrupting stereotypes and putting it in the faces of people, as Evelina was saying, and having those conversations on an ongoing basis. And because I don't think that we can wish away the stereotypes, and it will mean that we really do need to do a lot more work around deliberate work around getting people to where we want them to be in terms of their cognitive skills around gender biases.
That's amazing, Juliet. I mean, a number of things there. You know, I spent some time in Ghana myself, so I can absolutely empathize with that feeling that you know, Ghana is definitely still behind in that way of disguising their gender bias. You know, I felt like I'd walked back into the early days of my career when I went to Ghana. The way that you know, and you know, I was director of the NGO, so I was expected to be the big boss, but I was a woman, so that was really difficult for everybody to understand and to soak up. But I really love that that really logical approach that you described there about how to address it, you know, in a very matter-of-fact way. You know, we'll take somebody's decision, regardless, you know, whether they're male or female, and we'll measure the results, and that measurement shows that the outcome is successful, whoever is making those decisions, and the plan that we take. I really love that. I think that's a really simple example that, you know, we can broadcast to quite a lot of people to get out there and help move that needle, as you say, further forward. So thank you ever so much, all of you. That's really interesting. And again, Juliet, as you say, you know, the fact that we are in slightly different continents. Evelina, I think you actually spend time between the US and the UK. Rebecca, obviously you're based in the UK, but you do a lot of work in Africa as well. And Juliet, you're mostly based in Ghana. So thank you so much for those experiences. One of the things that I've kind of, I think actually it was during our prep for this panel that somebody mentioned it, and it really made me think. You know, we on a daily basis, we are quite often, I know that in my experience, I've worked in very male dominated environments. So on a daily basis, I have come up against these challenges, the stereotypes, the language that's used. And I have realized very recently, which is a bit sad considering my age and the length of my career, that I have internalized those experiences, and I have just, to a large extent, accepted you know, what has been presented to me. You know, how do you guys feel about that? You know, have you always known that you didn't want to internalize it and that you've always pushed it away, or have you been internalizing it and are now trying to change that? What would your advice be for other women who are starting out in their career, or who don't realize that actually some of their belief system is based on what the males in their life and in their professional lives have pushed onto them? What would you say about that? Juliet, I'm going to come back to you.
Oh, thank you. I mean, stereotypes, it's all down to the way that we're socialized. And I've been lucky to be kind of surrounded by strong women all my life. So sometimes I'm not the best person to ask about stereotypes, especially in the Ghanaian context and how those stereotypes play out. But having said that, I think that I've noticed that I indeed bought into a particular stereotype. And as a result, I developed what we call the imposter syndrome. And I would find myself repeatedly introducing myself as the team lead, rather than say that I'm the deputy country manager or the country manager or the executive director. I always, at big, huge international meetings or anywhere else, I would say I was the team lead. Now, that's not, you know, a bad thing in itself. And sometimes it's needed in some instances when you want to build team spirit. But I found that, you know, in certain instances, it didn't quite build confidence, not in my team and certainly not in the people that I was meeting, because sometimes what's needed is the commander of the army and not her wing woman. That's what they want. They want the commander of the army leading the charge into battle. And essentially, I was presenting them all the time with the wing woman saying I'm a team lead and that sort of thing. But the thing is, I find that men can go to a cocktail event and they will hold court, dropping off names of people that they know, people of influence, and telling endless stories about things that they've achieved at work and out of work. And, you know, when women do the same, they're likely to be stigmatized, I think. Certainly in my culture, and I certainly was at some point accused of being loud or obnoxious or actually a limelight hogger, and so that's where that whole imposter syndrome started too, because then, in spite of having role models that are strong and you know, my mother always says you're as good as anybody else, and you know, it's your brain that's going to get measured and what sorts. I found that, you know, I kind of recoiled, and so it took me that certain awareness, I think, in my second year as a deputy country manager at the British Council many years ago. My line manager at the time, we had a performance management, and he said, "Your decisions are really, really good, but you're always second guessing yourself, and you always lose time for our team to move forward and resolve, you know, issues quickly." And that got me into that place where I thought, yeah, maybe I should actually sit up. And just quickly to say that, you know, in a world where we have to tell stories and be interviewed based on competency, and so there are lots of competency based interviews and that sort of thing, I find that men have more experience, if you will, doing that. And so then it becomes a vicious cycle, because what they've done is they've held court at all these cocktail events. They've spoken about their war stories on and off the field, how they've transformed the organization, the people of influence they know. And they've done it so often that when they do come into the work environment, they will get the job ahead of a female who is not able to tell those competency-based stories. And so I think that it's one of those things that I noticed earlier on in my career, and I have kind of clawed back at.
That's really interesting. A couple of things that there's so many things, Juliet, that I kind of wish we were in a room and I could just ask you lots of questions now. But a couple of points that you made there that I wanted to pick up on is, you know, you said you were surrounded by strong women, so you didn't feel as impacted by the internalization thing. Obviously, imposter syndrome came out quite strongly, and I think that's the case for a lot of us. You know, I know that I've lived with that a lot over the years. So being surrounded by strong women, what do you think, you know, what are some examples that they provided to you that would help other people, other women that didn't have those you know, those gender support in their life? What sort of things do you think helped you from those strong women in your life?
Well, so my mother, for example, was a what they now call a physician assistant. In Ghana, these people were trained back in the day in the 60s and 70s to man hospitals or smaller clinics in the villages because we hadn't trained enough doctors to take over all the health facilities. And so coming into that, you know, that position of she calls herself the small doctor in the community, and sometimes it was a village and she would be moved around, so it would be a town and all that sort of thing. We ended up in Australia, where I grew up in Australia. So, you know, that seeing my mother, who was educated in that way, talk about, as I say, your mind is your most prized possession, and don't let anybody tell you what to think and how to think. And something that Rebecca said that resonated with me, curiosity. My mother always said the only way to become better was to be curious. And so I was always asking questions, which is probably why I ended up in journalism. But then if you juxtapose that with my grandmother, who never entered, no, actually, she did enter into the class 4, elementary school, class 4. She didn't quite get into middle school. If you juxtapose her worldliness and just the way that she handled she was a real matriarch, and the way that she handled the men in the society. She would go up to the village meeting, the town hall meeting, and ask questions and debate the men and tell them what she felt was happening on her farm and how people were encroaching on that property and all of that sort of thing. That's why I'm saying that for me, I had very strong role models who told me that my brain and cultivating my brain and asking questions was important. And I've done that all my life. So I suppose if we told younger people that don't be afraid to ask questions, don't be afraid to push the boundaries any which way you can, maybe, just maybe, we will move forward a little bit quicker.
Thank you. Thank you for elucidating on that. I think what I took from that is where you ended with that is advising young people to be curious and ask questions and find out where who they want to be. I can't remember which one of you said it in the beginning in the intros, but being your true authentic self is really powerful, and we should rather than thinking about stereotypes and genders, we should encourage everybody to be their own authentic, genuine self, and they can find that out by asking themselves questions. And also, I guess the thing that we can do is make sure that there are plenty of strong female role models out there for them to take their guidance from if they don't have strong female role models within their family like you did. So you touched on something Rebecca said earlier. So Rebecca, I'm going to come to you. What do you feel about that? That internalization of society rules. Have you allowed that to happen? Have you started pushing that away? What would your advice be to young women that might be experiencing this?
I'd be surprised if anyone could say that they hadn't internalized some stereotypes along the way. I think it's incredibly damaging and incredibly hard to peel back.
Yeah,
I think even when you realize that a stereotype, that something that you've been exposed to is not something that you buy into any longer. Going forward in life, I think the imprint is often, particularly if it happened at a young age, and I think that's why early childhood education is so important, because the imprint is there under the surface, and it bubbles up in moments. Juliet was talking about imposter syndrome and second guessing yourself, and that's when these you walk into a room fully confident, and then you stand at a boardroom table and all of the faces staring at you don't look like you. Suddenly you start second guessing yourself, and your idea of what they're thinking may have no bearing on reality. They may not have any of those. And it doesn't matter either way. Go in there and do the job as well as you could have done it regardless, because it doesn't matter at that point. But often we kind of sabotage ourselves in those situations. I think, I often think of when you talk about men having more of the senior executive jobs, is it because a man and a one out over a woman for a role that they had both applied for, or is it sometimes that women didn't apply for the role that could have? And it's definitely both of those things are happening, but are women sometimes taking themselves out of the game that they could have won had they thrown their hat in the ring, because of a feeling like we don't belong or we're not comfortable, and that's where I think it's hard to measure how much damage is done by the internalization of these stereotypes, and it's impossible to ever really unpick it completely. So in terms of what you can do about it, advice, what you can do about it, working with young children and making sure that they have more broader view of what they're capable of and what's possible for them is really important. And for people who are older, surround yourself with positive peer groups, and people who are not demonstrating the kind of hang-ups that you might be bringing to the table. Because if you're surrounded by that on the surface, it gives less opportunity for the stuff that's underneath for you to bubble up. There's just less time and less space for that stuff to bubble up, because it's being because your life is full of positive influences and positive role models. So in terms of advice, that's kind of what I would suggest. But also, you know, maybe don't beat yourself up too much, because I think everybody has that. I think you know, these imprints are you know, from a very young age, and it's hard to, it takes a lot of energy to try and unpick that stuff.
I think that's very true. I know that there are a lot of studies out there that show that you know, if a man looks at a job description and he can tick a couple of things off the list that he's capable of, or has even, you know, touched in his career, he'll apply for the job. Whereas a woman will look at it, and if there's one thing that she can't do, she won't apply for the job. And that's you know, that's something that we need to, as you say, Rebecca, addressing things from the whole range at a young age. Really inspire and encourage people, regardless of everything, you know, that they can go and do whatever they want to do, you know, aim for something and go and make it happen. And also at all levels, at all ages, to surround yourself with people who are encouraging, people who are inspiring. You know, there's what is, I think, is quite an encouraging trend, is there are a lot of people out there looking for coaches and mentors now, so that they find people. I know that I did this a few years ago. I found my professional crush and asked him to be a mentor for me, because you know, he was somebody in our field who was incredibly inspiring and inclusive and wonderful. So and I've done it with a couple of females as well, in order to make sure that I have that great peer group around me, including the ladies at Move the World. I have to say, they inspire me every single day. So thank you for that, Rebecca. I think sound advice, and I think we should probably share this recording to all of the females in the room, so that they can get some great advice from all of you. Evelina, what are your thoughts on this, you know, internalization and advice that you would give out to people?
If I can just very quickly comment on something that Rebecca said, I could not agree more in terms of women not even thinking about applying for the job. And I wanted to give an example. As a first-year analyst, when I first started at Goldman Sachs, we had this training, and you can imagine you start 50-50, 50% guys, 50% girls. And towards the end of the training session, they asked us, and they did that first, you know, guys and girls separately. And they asked, who here thinks they're going to be the next a future CEO of Goldman Sachs? 90% of the guys raised their hands, and I think there were 3 girls that raised their hands, which for me was absolutely staggering. And again, like, it's interesting, because me, again, sitting in the audience, being one of those girls, like, you start raising your hand, and then you look around, it's like, hey, 1 second, nobody else raising their hand, I'm not going to like go out on a, whereas with the guys, it was just completely just so natural, and it was just so shocking to see, because again, it's a room of, you know, 21-year-old kids that, you know, still didn't have that, you know, preconception of the workplace, and like, it's just how much he's already formed, you know, at that age, at that point in time. So I just wanted to give that example, because I thought it was like such a relevant example for what Rebecca was talking about.
Absolutely, perfect example.
But you know what, here's what I would say about internalizing stereotypes. I think that it depends a lot. First of all, I think stereotypes are incredibly harmful. Negative stereotypes are very harmful, regardless of the type of person you are. However, what I would say is that your personality really determines how you would respond to those stereotypes. For example, I think that one of the ways I've responded to like those stereotypes is by rebelling against them. which sounds like a positive way to respond, but to a certain extent it really isn't, because by the virtue of like really being out there and trying to act in a way that proves that that stereotype is not true, you end up going so far off in another direction that you move away from where you actually would have been otherwise. So again, for example, again, in my career, trying to push back on the fact that like nurturing, communicating, I'm like, not nurturing, I'm aggressive. I most probably have veered, further out into being aggressive than I would have otherwise been. So it's interesting because again, it's a different, sometimes you can obviously conform, sometimes you can rebel, but both of these things, since we're talking about your unique personality and your true self, in both instances, there was an external agitator that took you out of that position, regardless of whether you move closer to it or you move further away from it. So it is interesting because I do think that it is very relevant. The fact that we're faced with it definitely impacts you. How it impacts you, again, is different, and it depends on, again, your personality. But at the end of the day, that impact is very profound. And I want to go back to something that Juliet said, because it really resonated with me, and it made me think, quite frankly, about stereotypes and positive role models, and what were some of the impactful things in my life that really allowed me to have faith in who I am, no matter what stereotypes are being projected on me. And I would say that most probably, similarly to Juliet, were my parents. So when I was younger, my parents' dinner was a really big deal in my family. Everybody waits. I mean, I'm an only child, but all three of us, if my dad is late, even if he comes back, like at 8:30 from work, we wait, because effectively this was our family time. And dinners were not like a 15, 20-minute thing. You sit at the table for an hour. And during that hour, you really speak to your parents. And again, my parents would ask me, hey, how was your school day? What happened? How did you feel about this? And they would talk to me and talk to me and talk to me. And you know what? It really built a lot of self-confidence. For example, I'd come home, I was a little bit of a nerd. That would say, hey, like other people were making fun of me because, I'm a nerd when it comes to math, or, I'm getting a certain grade, and like they're saying, oh, like, and you know what? My parents would sit me down and be like, you should be proud of being a nerd. Because you know what? Nerds actually go really far in life because they're excellent academically, and ultimately, and hearing your parents say that times and times again, ultimately becomes belief. So I don't know if that's advice in terms of self-help as it pertains to women, but what I do want to say is you can definitely impact your children, because education, in my opinion, and self-confidence starts at home. So as much as, it's easier to just do your own thing, taking the time of day to talk to your kid day in and day out, and basically give them that self-confidence, in my opinion, is something that is incredibly impactful. Because again, back to the original example I gave, by the time they're 21, they're pretty shaped, i.e. they already have some of those stereotypes. So those early years, as Rebecca was saying, in terms of early education, are so incredibly important. And I think that that is definitely, it's got to be a part of the solution.
I absolutely agree, and that's a really interesting perspective to have brought in there at the end there, Evelina, about what we should be doing as I was going to say as parents. I'm not a parent, but I do have, there's a lot of young children in my life, and actually we all I'm sure we all have children in our life, and we have a duty and a responsibility to actually make sure that we're giving them positive feedback and things that build their confidence. So that's a really interesting perspective to bring in there. And a couple of the other things that you said there, about tying back to Rebecca and choosing your battles, tied in with that whole, when you push against the stereotype, are we doing it because we want to push against the stereotype, or are we doing it because it's actually going to be beneficial for us? That's a really interesting cycle of thoughts and connection of thoughts there, and kind of ties into the very last thing that we were going to talk about today, which we have touched on in all of these topics, because they're all of these are so interconnected. But we've talked about in life as on a macro level. We've kind of made some allusions to how that might be on industry by industry, and also in different cultures as well. But on a personal level, we've kind of touched on this as well, but is it wise just to stick to your comfort zone, or is there power in stepping outside and embracing these challenges and opportunities that the society puts on us, that the stereotypes might give us? What's your ultimate position there? What would you say to anybody that's listening, but anybody else that might come across this recording at some point? I will come to Juliet. You're on mute at the moment, Juliet.
Yeah, so in terms of, did you say stepping out?
Yes, if you had a choice between, would you recommend to people that it's, if you've got a comfort zone, then, stay there, don't pick any battles, or would you say that there's power in stepping out?
Right, well, here's the thing. I think I've got a very singular spirit, and some people may call that strong-headed or something, and that I'm headstrong. But I think I call that self-determination, and I show a lot of fortitude, and I'm really relentless when I put myself to a task that interests me. And yet I've only got a few things that really interest me. Social, as I said in the beginning, social protection issues interest me, advocating for vulnerable groups and underserved communities, that type of thing. Social media, that's not something that interests me that much. But I find that, and so I'm really uncomfortable in that space. It's one of the places where I'm the least comfortable. I'm even more comfortable in a boardroom full of old men and that sort of thing. But on social media, I'm not that comfortable. But I do find that more and more social media is the biggest tool in the box for advocacy. And so if I'm passionate about and relentless when it comes to advocating for vulnerable groups and underserved communities and that sort of thing, I've got to challenge myself to be in that space. So here I am, for example, I'm taking baby steps, but steps nonetheless. I'm challenging myself to tell stories on social media, show up on vlogs and podcasts and Facebook Live events and all of that, trying to keep in congruence with what my organization does as well. And so each time I put myself out there, although I'm cringing, I clench my teeth and carry on. It's the new world. And so that's what I'm doing to kind of get out of my comfort zone. Wow,
that's a perfect example, and I think a lot of people can resonate with that, quite frankly. I know I do. So Evelina, what about you? Also on mute.
Let me just unmute myself. Stepping out of comfort zones or staying within. So I personally, at least in my experience, and that might be different from others, I find that every single time I've stepped out of my comfort zone, I've grown. And I've found that most of the times when I've also stepped out of my comfort zone, I've been very uncomfortable along the way. I.e., it was growth, and it was usually painful. For example, I stepped out of my comfort zone to leave Bulgaria and go to school in the States. I stepped out of my comfort zone to leave the States and move for a job opportunity to London, leaving all my friends, everybody I've known behind, and starting from scratch in both of those instances. I've stepped out of my comfort zone throughout my career in terms of, stepping up and taking on more responsibilities. And all of these things have actually taught me a tremendous amount. And I actually think that being able to actually push yourself ensures that it's an expression that we use in the finance industry. It ensures that you're not a one-trick pony, i.e. you learn that one trick and you stick to it. It ensures that you grow, but make no mistake, I think that sometimes it is incredibly uncomfortable. Again, I think that, being within your comfort zone, you know what you're doing, you know what, it is about, and you feel good about it. And quite frankly, I think that at the end of the day, you need to find a balance between those two. When it comes to your professional career, most probably early in your career, you want to push yourself more, because I always joke that earlier in your career, you don't get paid in achievement, you don't get paid in money, you don't get paid in accolades, you really get paid in knowledge. You obtain knowledge. So pushing yourself and obtaining that knowledge is incredibly important. Once you actually reach a certain point, that is when you start getting remunerated, and that's why you start making a difference in giving back, because you have that skill set. So these are two different parts in your career, and I think that most probably, and again, that's a stereotype, I don't want to project it on others, but from my perspective, I have found that early on, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone over and over again, it's important, and it remains important throughout your life. But I think that later on, you get to a place where you want to strike that balance between being out of your comfort zone, but at the same time being productive within your comfort zone and making a difference. Because if you're constantly learning, you're not really producing much in terms of what you have actually learned. So comfort zones are an interesting thing, and I don't think it's just one shoe fits all, i.e. like in or out. It is understanding how you feel when you're really again inside or out of it, and how that ultimately impacts you. But I do have to say that the one thing that I actually think, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, comfort zones are one thing, but I think that a lot of people spend a lot of time talking about your positive skills, your negative skills, things that you're good at, things that you're bad at. And I think a lot of people confuse stepping out of your comfort zone with working on your weaknesses. I am a big believer that your weaknesses are never going to become your strengths. I'm a big believer that you should work on your strengths and make them stronger. You should figure out what your weaknesses are and stay away from them, or make them slightly less visible. But I don't think you're ever going to flip your personality on its head and really transform something. And quite frankly, I think transforming something just for the sake of transforming it, at the end of the day, doesn't really get you anywhere. Because guess what? If you're not great at something, that is what teams are for. There is somebody on your team that is excellent at it. Why would you spend all of these times to be 30% of as good as they are, considering the fact that you can simply rely on their help and their input? So I don't think that comfort zones and growth should be mistaken with, weaknesses and strengths and how we work on them. But listen, I think that the comfort zone and growth and these are important things, and they're always uncomfortable to push through. But I think that ultimately they're important. They're important for your life on a professional and on a personal level.
I think that's great, and a fantastic perspective. And also I think that last point you made, if it is indeed controversial, then I stand on the controversial side. I absolutely agree with that. And I think it comes back into that thought process that we've been having about people should be encouraged to be their genuine, authentic self, and being pushed to work on your weaknesses when you can be powerful with your strengths. And as you say, we're all different. There are people who are strong where you are weak, and you combine in order to make a powerful team, right? Rebecca, what are your thoughts on this?
I definitely think everybody should step out of their comfort zone more than once. Because just because you had a bad experience that you don't want to repeat the first time, it doesn't mean you're going to have the same experience the second or the third time. However, not everyone is a boundary pusher. So after you've tried it once, twice, 3 times. If you really don't want to do it, just own your space. That's fine too. But I think that there is another question, and this circles us back to what we were talking about, internalization of stereotypes. Before we even look at whether we need to push our boundaries, maybe we should consider, did we set our boundaries too small? Have we set our boundaries in the right place for us? So, we talked about how women tend to underestimate themselves. So particularly with women, it's another stereotype of women underestimating, men overestimating.
Yeah.
So look at, if you're really uncomfortable with stepping out of your comfort zone, you don't need to keep doing that. But I do think everyone should really reflect on, are they, if you have set your boundary really small because safety is a high priority feeling in your life, then that's fine. But understand that that's why you're doing it. Yeah. Don't just think that's as far as you can go, and you haven't really thought about why, because a lot of the things that you may have internalized that make you think that's where the boundary is could have been relevant to the people who gave you those impressions, but they're no longer relevant for your life. And I think as generations shift along, a lot of the challenges that our parents faced and have prepared us to face, it's a new world. We're not facing those challenges anymore. So you should definitely listen to those lessons and think about whether it's relevant to you now, but it may not be. And if it's not relevant, you can leave it behind. So that would be my point on that one.
And another fantastic point, I think that's right. People don't necessarily think about whether their boundaries are the right boundaries. So if you expanded your boundaries because you're capable of all that, then would you indeed be stepping out of your comfort zone? Thank you so much to all three of you for those amazing experiences. I've tried not to get distracted by the chat, but I've seen a couple of people post in there and say fantastic points and thank you for sharing your experiences. So I wholeheartely echo that. The final thing that I would like to ask each of you before we hand back to Claire is, circling back to the launch of the IWD theme of hashtag choose to challenge. I would like to ask each of you what one thing you would choose to challenge this year. So Evelina, if I can come to you first.
Going back to what I said at the very beginning of our talk, what I choose to challenge this year is how to be a successful entrepreneur, which is something which is brand new to me, and it requires a completely different skill set from a lot of the hats I've worn up until this point in my career. So I'm just very excited about that journey, and I'm very excited about choosing to challenge marrying being a successful entrepreneur with being a successful investor. So 2021 is actually quite a big challenge for me already. So that's what I choose to challenge this year.
Fantastic, thank you for that, and good luck for a very, very fruitful 2021. Juliet, I'm going to come to you next, but before I ask you to tell us what your choose to challenge is, I do just want to go back to what you said about having a singular spirit. Whatever that means, I love it as a phrase. I think it's beautiful, and I'm going to use it all the time now. When I find somebody beautiful and just inspiring, I'm going to tell them that they have a singular spirit. So thank you for sharing that with us. And if you would now share what you choose to challenge this year.
So I'm choosing to challenge the notion that a woman who's busy on the career path, who's attending conferences, accepting speaking engagements, is less nurturing of a mother and is essentially all over the place. I choose to challenge the view that women just need to hold onto a 9-to-5 job and not to take on extra work or volunteer for extra duties and not try out new things, just like the men do with pride and comfort. So I choose to be all over the place this year.
Oh my God, I love that even more. Singular spirit and choosing to be all over the place this year. I salute you, Juliet. That's fantastic. And Rebecca, what about you?
I absolutely loved this challenge because I've never set myself a challenge before which was based around a gender consideration, you know, up front and center. So I had to think about it quite a bit, and there's a photograph which I'm going to share with you now. It's always really inspired me. I took it in March 2020 in Nigeria, just before having to come back before COVID. Yep. And it's one of my favorite photographs from working with the schools, but there's no children in this photograph. It's just two mothers, and I've looked at it so many times. And when this challenge came up, I went back to this photograph and looked at it again to inspire me for the challenge. So these are my two mothers. And when I look at this photograph, you know, what I see is there's two mothers who had the initiative to come to a school that day when we were doing the library launch to see what was going on. At the end of the day, when their kids had dumped their library books and their bags on their mothers to go off to play, they had the curiosity to open up the books, the curiosity about reading, to look at them. They had the knowledge to sound out some of the words and read some of the words, and they had the desire to share that knowledge with each other. So I'm choosing to challenge myself, Christianna Foundation, and anyone else who wants to join us to find a way to form support groups or support bubbles, which we're now also familiar with, around these women and women like them, so that they can harness the potential that I see in that photograph and use it to increase literacy in their communities.
Wow, that is amazing. And what a fabulous photo. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for telling us what your challenge is. On that note, thank you once again, all of you. I've had a fabulous time listening and talking with you. And back to you, Claire, now.
You didn't get to tell us what you choose to challenge.
I'll do that later.
Once again, thank you so much to everybody. I've literally written like a page of notes of what I can take away. And I wanted to step back into the stepping out of comfort zone just for a minute, because as we were talking about it, I thought, if I look back on what I've done in my life, I think I've stepped out of my comfort zone numerous times, and it was exciting, and I didn't think twice when I was younger. I moved to London with 2 suitcases and no idea where to live, and that was an issue. And what I find really interesting as I think about it is, as I get older, those risks scare me more. And as you were speaking, I thought, well, why do those risks scare me? Why can't I just get on a plane with 2 suitcases again? And I'm wondering if it's because I start to think about the expectation that is on me of, you should be settled now, get a career, stay in that career, sit in it, buy a house, have the babies, be settled. And that's something that, I've already challenged myself, but challenge my own internal self of, what is it to take a risk for me? How can I step out of the box every now and then? Not thinking about what are the people going to think about it. I'm doing it just because I decide. So thank you for that. I do want to open up to a few questions. There's been a ton of thank you so much from hundreds of people, not hundreds, but hey. One question is from Megan. She mentioned, we've been conditioned to view leadership in particular ways, which has been shaped by traditional, hierarchical, often male approaches to leadership. We know the world we are in is uncertain and the challenges we face complex. How might women help to shape a new leadership better suited for tackling the complexity of what we face? Better sensing and listening, collaborating, challenging assumptions and biases in thoughtful ways, and of course, taking action. Megan, always one for math. Does anybody want to take a stab at that one?
Who's going to be brave enough to go first?
It's about your comfort zone.
I mean, that's a pretty loaded question. And in terms of how do we as a collective start to, change the narrative even further. And for me, that whole concept of what men are conditioned to do and what women are conditioned to do is something that we as the new generation of women need to start analyzing. What is it that we've been told to do or can do over the years that are no longer, as Evelina was saying earlier on, are no longer the case, but have been kind of subtly put into some kind of backhanded compliments, and sort of we get different champions of the female movement of empowerment, that we can actually say, well, if you analyze it, if you look at the socialization that we've all gone through, these are the issues, this is how that's changed, and this is how we now need to claw it back, if you like, claw it back to ourselves to start a new conversation on where are we now? Because I think that some of the conversations that we're having are pretty old in terms of how we're what were the preconceived notions of feminism and maleness and all of that, and how has that changed? I think that we need to put a bookmark where it was 10 years ago and to start getting new evidence as to where we are in our daily lives. I don't know if that stabs a part of that very complex question, but I'll leave it to others to try to answer the rest of the question.
Thank you for that, Juliet. Does anybody else want to take a stab at that one? I do have two other questions.
I just wanted to say one thing, just specifically to that question. When I think about how do we change leadership practices, the first thing that comes to mind to me is one step at a time. I think that in today's world, we are all just too used to go elephant hunting, in terms of like, hey, I want to change the world, I'm going to change this preconception, and the reality of the situation is that can be very overwhelming. That can be very, again, to somebody like me with my type of background, that is not specific enough. I need to know, what do you mean by that? Like specifically, how do you get there? Which is why I like smaller tasks. So when I think about, hey, how do I want to change leadership, I think, okay, so in what leadership role do I find myself in my life? How do I want to change it? What is my 5-step plan to change, that one room that I control, or that one floor that I control, or these people that I'm working for or working with or working for me? Because I think that by taking those identifiable steps that change your immediate surroundings, you really are making a difference. And what you want to hope for is that if there are more and more people that are taking measurable steps to make a difference, no matter how small those steps are, ultimately that is going to snowball and it is going to add up. And I do have to say that there are so many people out there in the media, etc., that are constantly saying, it is not enough, that is not enough, that is not, like, fair enough, it is not enough. But the reality of the situation, it is a step on the way there. We cannot just, automatically, teleport ourselves in, a universe where all of these things have, changed just by us talking about them. We need to actually take measurable steps. So again, every time we have a conversation, I'm always the person that's, okay, so net, what does that mean? And, what are the follow-ups? Right? Like, do we have follow-ups on the back of this call? Can you give me like the 3 or 4 things you're going to be changing tomorrow, just so that I know that we did something? So I think that, again, my answer to that question is you change leadership one step at a time, or one person at a time.
And I think that's fair enough. My motto through life has always been little steps, because if you do look at the big picture, as you say, it can be quite overwhelming and you don't know where to start. But if you take little steps, one step is better than no steps, right? So I think that's a really great point there, Evelina. Rebecca, have you got anything that you'd like to add?
I mean, I would say the first step in that is just balancing the gender representation in decision-making roles. I think those other elements, like listening, sensing, collaboration, challenging assumptions, all those kind of things. If you just have an equal number of people with the different perspectives in the decision-making roles, then I think those things will flow. So for me, that would be the first step, and it is very complex, so it has to be one step at a time.
Thank you. Just completely conscious of time and that we may run over. Sorry, stay if you can. I've got two really, really great questions that I do feel need to be at least expressed. One from Ransford, I'm sorry if I didn't say that right, but with cultural expectations for young women in Ghana, as Juliet alludes, what do you think is the role of policy in challenging the cultural expectations to unlock the potential of young women in Ghana?
Gosh, so I suppose that one's directly for me. I mean, we were just saying that, look, this whole thing about gender biases and all of that is really a complex one. There are lots of complex issues, and as much as we've broken so many barriers and moved the needle quite a bit, we're now having to deal with the issues of equal pay. Rebecca was just talking about board representation, trustee positions, childcare, and something that I'm quite interested in recently is on just how to analyze job language usage in position descriptions so that we're removing gendered language biases that will probably reduce female applicants to certain better paying roles. But all of these are not necessarily things that are policy based or things that you need to leave up to the policymakers. These are things that are more culturally entrenched, more, day to day. And so that's where the problem is, because as Evelina was saying earlier on in the chat, we've moved from blatant gender biases to the more, they're hidden. The conversation's more hidden. It's more subtle. And so it's not, I wouldn't say, Ransford, that we would put this at policy level, or yes, there are things that policymakers can do to help. And in Ghana, I think that they've done quite a lot of that. They've got female affirmation. They've got the girl child, send your girl child to school campaigns. There's the STEM women in science, tech, and math, engineering and math. And so there are all of these campaigns to help the female grow into different roles. But I think ultimately it's something to do with the culture. It's something to do with the everyday person. And for me, I don't have an answer as to how to change that and how to do it rapidly. And so I'll fall back on what Rebecca and Evelina was saying, one step at a time, one person at a time.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much for addressing that question, Juliet.
It's interesting because one of my mottos for the last year and a half now has been moment by moment, because I feel like that's the only thing I can control. I can't control the day. It's far too long. There's way too much going on, but I can control moment by moment. So that really resonates. Thank you. And this final question from Diana really resonates with me, actually. She says, great point from Evelina about weaknesses. But I would ask, what if your weakness is how you self-sabotage? Which is quite a few women encounter in their careers. I definitely hear that. I think I self-sabotage quite a bit. But anybody like to take a go at that one? What happens if your weakness is self-sabotage?
Well, I did give the example of when I felt like I had the imposter syndrome, and second guessing myself, because that is what essentially Diana's talking about, where you do feel like you're not as good as even some people, and in this instance, men and women both would say, "Oh, great job, Juliet. That was really brilliant." And you're internalizing, "Oh, I could have done this better, done that better. Self-evaluation is always great, but where it gets to the point where there's an inertia because you're afraid that someone's going to find you out, that's what the imposter syndrome is, and that leads to second guessing your every decision. And so, what does one do if that's the weakness? Take what I did, which is talk yourself out of it. Each time you realize that you're um, self-sabotaging by saying to someone out loud, oh, that was nothing, when indeed it was something. It was a well thought through decision that brought great value to the team and moved the team forward. Each time you're tempted to say something negative about your achievements, then you should pull back and smile and say, yes, thank you, I really worked hard on that. And by doing that constantly, you will kind of grow out of that whole self-sabotaging cycle, is what I would say.
Thank you. That's fantastic.
The
That's
one thing I would add to that, if I may, is I find that when you get to a point where you feel that you are going to self-sabotage yourself, and I think everybody is guilty to a certain extent of self-sabotaging, you know that this is not good for you, but you're going to do it. You do it regardless. You either can't help yourself or you have gotten to a point where you cannot help yourself. I think that for me, at least, the most important thing is to take a step back. I usually self-sabotage. I'm a pretty passionate person when it actually comes to, my career or conversation, etc. So sometimes it's as easy as, counting to 10 and just walking around before I walk back into a meeting, because I know I'm about to implode, and I know that that is not going to help the conversation, because those particular people will not react well to that, but the emotion is building. So sometimes it's literally a matter of just taking sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes there's so much frustration that has been built from a day-to-day perspective that you literally need to take a week off and go somewhere and do something completely different and speak to people that are completely different to your line of work or to your world, or to give you a little bit of perspective. Because again, self-sabotage for me is becoming so ingrained in the day-to-day that you're really missing the big picture. And you cannot unwind yourself out of that. So for me, when you recognize, by the way, the very fact that you're recognizing that you're self-sabotaging is already a step in the right direction, because most people don't appreciate that. After you realize that you do it, I think that the second thing you do is you take a step back and you really start to think it through. Because again, back to Juliet's point, you realize that you do it, but the inertia just keeps you going and you keep on. And unless, you can actually detach yourself, it is very difficult to correct that type of behavior. And once again, I would say, don't be afraid to speak to others, whether that is, again, speak to a mentor, speak to somebody else that has gone through a similar thing. Seek, sometimes, by the way, seek professional help. It's funny because people very frequently think about, yeah, you seek professional help for really big problems. You're not going to go and seek professional help in terms of mental health, etc., for an issue at work. No, this is exactly why there are so many resources, because they help you self-analyze and they help you work through something like that. I think we need to break down that taboo in terms of actually speaking to somebody that can professionally help you with a roadblock that's in your mind. So yeah, my answer to the question is take a step back and seek help to see the bigger picture and overcome it.
Amazing. Amazing. Rebecca, did you want to add to anything to that?
So I was just conscious of time, but I would just say it's that, so in terms of it being about weaknesses, it circles back to that pushing our boundaries. When you identify something as a weakness, maybe test that assumption 2 or 3 times until you know if it really is a weakness. Because maybe it is a weakness, and maybe you should, compensate for that in a different way. But a lot of the times you can strengthen those areas. So test it, and test it a few times before you accept it as given.
Thank you. I think that ties in. Margaret asked a question. We talk about this, and the policymakers are saying all the right things, but in reality, we don't see it. I think what has just been mentioned kind of answers that question of how can we, actually put these policies into place. And it is by taking everything that we've said is those little steps, by doing what we can in our own corner to then reach other corners. So again, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you for everybody for staying 6 minutes later. Really, really appreciate every single person here today, but especially our 4 panelists. Kellie, thank you so much for hosting. Rebecca, Juliet, and Evelina, thank you so much for being here today and giving up your time, your evening. Really appreciate everything you are and who you are. As a final plug, we are fundraising and raising funds for our Get Global program to ensure that we can pump out some more incredible women that you have met tonight. 10, 15 years from now, they can be on this stage as well. So there are links in the chat. If you want to stick around for a bit longer, I can hold. But other than that, thank you so much for being here tonight, and we will hopefully see you really soon.
Thank you, everyone.